Nicole, please tell us about Scharfenberger in general, and then the wine that is in everybody's glass, the Brut
Sure.
Rosé.
Thanks, Will. Hi, everybody. Thank you for taking the time. I think I appreciate most of you are probably done with lunch service and an easy way to spend a little bit of time tasting some wine. So we've got the Brut and the Brut Rosé, a little bit about Scharfenberger. If you're not familiar with the brand, like Will said, it's in the Anderson Valley. The Anderson Valley is an interesting place. It's the coolest appellation in California. I don't think most people realize that. It's only 15 miles long, so it's this very narrow, small little appellation, about 125 miles north of San Francisco, and really massive diurnal temperature swings. So you can have a 50-degree difference throughout the day in the Anderson Valley, which makes it spectacular for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. That's pretty much what you find there. A little bit of some off varieties like Gewürztraminer. There's a couple of producers making some aromatic whites from up there, but really it's a Pinot and Chardonnay area. So Scharfenberger, founded by John Scharfenberger. You might be familiar with not only the sparkling wines, but the chocolate brand he created after he sold his sparkling house. He was infatuated with champagne, not just sparkling wine, but the wines of Champagne, and didn't want to make wine in Carneros, which was pretty much at the time, 1980s, where people were making sparkling wine from. So in 1981, he went up to the Anderson Valley and he started producing sparkling wine. He began, like I said, to make his wines in 1981 in the Anderson Valley. Scharfenberger, both the wines, the brand is really based on Chardonnay. So these wines are all Chardonnay driven. That's why I like to taste both the Brut and the Brut Rosé together, because it's an interesting study. The wine is typically the base wine in the sparkling wines, both in the Brut and the Brut Rosé, same base wine, about 60% Chardonnay, 40% Pinot Noir. The winery itself sits on 120 acres of estate Chardonnay, situated in spectacular redwoods. What I didn't say about the Anderson Valley, and I should have sort of painted a quick portrait if you haven't seen pictures of it, is flanked by amazing redwood trees and just near the Pacific Ocean. So you have quite dramatic scenery and mostly soils that are sandstone, clay loam. So different than say in Champagne, which is why Chardonnay wines thrive there, particularly Chardonnay driven sparkling wines. These are multi-vintage wines. About 85% of the wine is the base vintage. And then 15% comes from reserve that we put away every vintage to make sure that we're building reserve wines to bring a house style as we go back to blend. I think one of the hallmarks of the Anderson Valley, not only in sparkling wines, but in wines in general, is this vibrant acidity. It can be very, very alive and fresh, as we say. And one of the ways we tame that with the Scharfenberger wines is 80% of the blend goes through malolactic, and it's 100% stainless steel fermented. We do dosage trials on both of these wines every year, but typically we're landing at about 10 grams per liter. And we try to use about 50% estate fruit and 50% grower fruit. So these wines are Mendocino County appellated. All of our estate fruit is coming from the Anderson Valley, and then the grower fruit coming from areas a little bit closer towards Ukiah, so Potter Valley and Hopland, if you're familiar with those small areas, if you've, like I said, if you've been to the region. But for the rosé, we're adding about 5% of a still wine Pinot Noir that we make intentionally for the addition. So it's made not with a sparkling wine in mind and not with a Pinot Noir bottling in mind. So somewhere in between, shorter maturation, shorter skin contact. So you're not getting super austere wine, but you're not getting the full power of tannin, right? I think too much abstraction on the still wine. If you were to add that back in, you get this very strange sparkling wine with tannins. So also the still wine, the Pinot Noir, also coming from our estate. So that's the Anderson Valley Pinot. And again, like I said, we're adding about a 5% still wine addition. The nice thing about these wines is we keep them entourage aging for about 2.5 years. And then after dosage, we like to keep them for an additional 6 months on the cork before we release them.
Beautiful wines from a beautiful place, and really unmatched. I think when we talk about sparkling wines coming out of California and certainly Northern California, the Anderson Valley is unique. You mentioned the diurnal swing, and I think it's an opportunity certainly for people to discover something above and beyond some of the other more well-known regions. Would you agree with that?
I do. I really do. It's definitely off the beaten path. I go once a week. I live in the town of Sonoma, so it's about a 2-hour drive for me. But it is, I was mentioning this to someone recently. If you visit a lot of wine regions, there's always some that stay in your mind about their beauty and how breathtaking they are, and you're struck by that. And to me, Anderson Valley is one of those areas that you just can't help but take a gazillion pictures of the sunsets and of the trees and the ocean. It's really, really quite beautiful.
Absolutely. And Scharfenberger certainly has its place in the history of sparkling wines within the Anderson Valley, not less what you have with other companion wineries and brands, certainly.
I think these wines, what I also love about these wines is that they are very rich. They're very mouth-filling, but that hallmark Anderson Valley acidity really holds them together so they don't get super flabby and makes them excellent food wines. I drink these wines a lot at home. I love the texture and that malolactic roundness just, I think, brings the whole thing together.
Question about other wines that Scharffenberger Cellars makes, which I know there are other wines. So certainly if you go out and visit, but maybe give a little tease there to get people out there and visit and try some additional wines besides the Brut and the Brut Rosé.
So I saw in the chat that Scharfenberger make a Blanc de Blanc. We do. We haven't for a long time. We haven't made one since 2010, but we have one in the cellar from 2019. And we have a Blanc de Noir for the first time from the 2019 vintage. Both of those wines will be vintage wines and they will release next year. And then at the winery, we make a zero dosage, a Brut Zero wine. We make a late harvest disgorged wine and a Cremant.